From the moment you enter this fight, you'll want to sprint directly toward Aldrich until he performs his opening attack. His most common opener seems to be arrows, though any of his melee attacks are likely as well. Once you're in position, focus on maintaining melee range and applying setup damage in between his attacks. We can define melee range here as about 3 to 4 meters or 10 to 12 feet from his body. One visual cue I use to help with this is the blade of his staff during this attack. If you stand at the spot of the blade following the attack, you should be at roughly the correct distance when he stands back up. Take care not to get too close, as this will cause him to teleport away from the player. Be extra mindful of this when you're behind him following an attack. As he turns to face you, he'll often scoot his body a little closer to you. This can result in him turning around and instantly queuing a teleport, even if it felt like you were at the right distance. If you do get a teleport, make your way to roughly the center of the arena. Stand firmly in one of the 4 quadratures of the arena, and he'll always teleport to the opposite corner. If you're comfortable in your timing, you can start sprinting towards this corner slightly before he appears. Though the consequence for getting too close in Phase 1 isn't so bad, the consequence for getting too far away is quite a bit more dangerous. From this range, Aldrich will start utilizing magic attacks. While these are all perfectly dodgeable, they're not as easy to do so, and can create some tricky situations when closing back into melee range. There are 2 damage thresholds for Phase 2. Naturally, there are 2 approaches you can take regarding setup damage in this fight. The first of these thresholds occurs once you've dealt 1650 or more damage to Aldrich. I like to refer to this as the soft threshold, since you can exceed this value and still keep Aldrich in Phase 1. This is where getting too close becomes a little more problematic. Damage above this threshold will push Aldrich into Phase 2 if you trigger a teleport. He'll perform the normal AoE attack preempting the teleport in Phase 1, then appear at the corner opposite of you in Phase 2. Many people will avoid exceeding this value of 1650, either to avoid any possibility of this incident, or due to a belief that this value is a hard trigger for Phase 2. As you can see though, this is not a hard trigger, and as long as you stay out of teleport range, Aldrich will stay in Phase 1. Knowing you can exceed this value, the next question is should you? Truthfully, it's not really necessary for Twin Blade runs, especially at +9, even more so if RTSR is being used. Perhaps it can be a bit helpful if you're looking to expand your punish options following the setup damage. Still, not totally necessary. As you probably guessed, the next threshold is the hard threshold that will immediately put Aldrich in Phase 2. This threshold occurs right at about 1900 damage dealt. You can tell when you've exceeded this value by witnessing the unique teleportation animation. Aldrich will quickly duck underground without casting an AoE. Just keep track of the damage you're dealing throughout the fight and avoid reaching 1900. Once you've dealt your desired setup damage, it's time to wait for an attack that will let you go all in. Which attack, or attacks you choose to punish, will depend on how comfortable you are with a number of factors. How well can you recognize and react to each attack? How well can you position yourself after each attack to allow proper punish? How much damage do you have? And can you deal with a little bit of Phase 2 in a pinch? A really popular approach is to wait specifically for the lunging swipe. This attack has the longest recovery of all of Aldrich's moveset, thereby allowing the most time to finish him off in Phase 1. The best way to punish this attack is to bundle during the wind-up and roll with the attack back and to the left at roughly 7 o'clock. Land 3 to 4 L1s immediately, jog with him as he backs up, recovering stamina, and unload the rest of your stamina bar with L1s. Because of its long recovery window, this attack is pretty forgiving in terms of not punishing it optimally. As proof of concept, perfect execution of this punish with +9 Twin Blades and RTSR can allow you to one-cycle Aldrich without any setup damage at all. Two other good options are the lunging poke and this corkscrew attack. Of these two, the lunging poke has slightly shorter recovery, but is easier to maneuver, and leaves Aldrich's head easily exposed for bonus damage. For these reasons, it's probably the easier of the two to punish. Conversely, the corkscrew attack has a longer recovery window, but requires more precise maneuvering. The proper way to do this is to roll the initial attack, bundle, take one hit on the tail, jog over to the head, and hit the exposed head as many times as you can. When it comes to these punishes, the ability to unlock and free aim for headshots is invaluable. Obviously, you'll want to decide for yourself which of these attacks you're comfortable punishing. My personal recommendation, though, is to always punish the lunging swipe and at least one of the other two attacks. If you spend the majority of the fight waiting for one attack, not only can it get frustrating, but it can open many opportunities for error. Now that we've covered the general tips and strategy for Phase 1, let's examine Aldrich's moveset in a little more detail. The majority of Aldrich's melee moveset consists of single-piece attacks. 3 out of these 5 were showcased in the previous segment, and were presented as good candidates for the single-cycle punish. You can roll with either lunging attack, much the same way you would when executing your finisher. Just be wary of how close you are to Aldrich when his AI goes to pick his next attack. Since you'll be attacking his torso, or even his head from this position, pay extra attention to the amount of damage you're dealing. Take care not to exceed your target. An effective alternative is to roll past all of these attacks when you're still in setup phase. From here, you can attack the tail exclusively for a known and consistent amount of damage based upon your build. One prevailing case of this is to go for 4 L1s on his tail with a +9 Twin Blade, RTSR, and Flynn's Ring setup. This will deal right around 1600 damage every time, plenty for this sort of approach. Both lunging attacks can be strafed as well. When he pulls back signaling either of these attacks, move in toward him. Offset yourself ever so slightly to his right, and move down the length of his tail during the active portion of the attack. If you're in far enough, you could simply stand there, though this could be a bit riskier. With the lunging swipe in particular, you can sort of steer him along a wide arc by standing farther to his right side. Use this to move him away from a wall and back out into the center of the arena. You don't need to strafe him to do this. The lunging poke doesn't allow you to steer him quite as much. The upside to this is you can stand farther left and not have to worry about putting him in a bad spot. Evading the attacks this way can provide you a bigger window to deal all your setup damage in one attack. Granted, you can already do this for some attacks with +9 Twin Blades without strafing. All 3 of these attacks should allow you to get at least 3 to 4 Twin Blade L1s in before backing off and repositioning to make sure he doesn't teleport. In fact, if you do attack his front side during the lunging swipe, he'll always back up following this attack. In this case, he'll essentially do your repositioning work for you. When you are repositioning, be very careful if you're behind or to the side of him. As he turns, the game will often register his position as closer to you than it appears. And what seems like adequate space in these situations ends up being too close, and he'll immediately teleport. Another single-piece attack Aldrich has is this overhead slam. Evade this with a delayed roll to the side, jogging backwards and rolling, or simply sprinting away if you recognize the attack quickly enough. You can punish this attack for setup damage if you'd like, but beware to account for torso or head damage. The final single piece attack I saved for last for a reason. Keep an eye out particularly for this janky mess. This attack looks similar to the lunging swipe, only he'll pull the blade over his right shoulder rather than his left. Back up a bit when you spot the windup for this attack, and then roll through it. The roll timing is a little earlier than you would expect. Or, if you get to his right side, you can run along the length of the blade, and he'll tend to zoom off straight forward. Just be careful to get back into position before he cues his next attack. This can be a handy direction to take, either in a tight space or if you don't fully trust your roll. And of course, even if you're in the right position, Aldrich can utilize arrows. You'll want to deal with this by running around to his backside. From here, you can continue moving forward if you want to turn him around, or make the full loop and keep him facing the same direction. Anything in between works as well, really. During the attack, you can fit in 2 punishes on the tail. Notice how I'll pre-cut to the right before going left in some situations. This pulls his body away from the pillar, allowing me to squeeze by. In many cases, you could run the other direction instead. Aldrich also has a pair of 2-piece attacks. The first variation consists of a swipe from the left, followed by a swipe from the right after a brief delay. You can roll through these attacks, roll away, or outspace them, just like the overhead slam. You can strafe the second swipe here, though it can be a little tricky. You'll want to roll into him on the first swipe, and hang ever so slightly to his left. If you can position yourself under the hilt of the weapon and slightly behind it, this attack should go right over you. Be careful not to get too far behind and to his left, as this can cause him to loop all the way around and hit you on the backside of the swing. Strafing these attacks might allow you to sneak in an extra hit, but otherwise isn't that useful for hitless. You could also sneak in 1 attack between these 2 slashes and then roll through the second. In the second variation of this attack, he'll perform the first swipe before slowly rising in the air, letting out a groan, and then slamming down his weapon. You can roll through the first part of this attack and get to the back of his tail. Circle around the tail as he performs the attack. You can even hit him while this is going on. This attack provides excellent punish opportunity if you can maneuver it well. I would go as far to say as this is a 4th possible candidate for a 1-cycle. If you choose not to punish this, simply roll back and/or outspace each portion of the attack. Be wary of pillars in this fight. Aldrich can easily get caught up on one of these pillars in the middle of a melee attack. With either lunging attack or the charging attack in particular, this can mess severely with his tracking, and in turn make these attacks much weirder to dodge. I won't go into too much detail over Aldrich's ranged attacks in Phase 1. With the exception of arrows, the idea is simply to never see them. However, if you do inadvertently catch yourself at distance, watch out for these 2 attacks. He's got these large singular magic projectiles. He'll cast these as singles or as pairs. Dodge through these while you try to get back in position. He'll also fire these clusters of smaller magic orbs. These orbs will hover in the air briefly before picking up speed and traveling toward the player. Use your rolls sparingly when avoiding this attack. Instead, make a wide arc around these clusters and outsprint them as much as possible. Maneuvering them this way will group them much more nicely, leaving you free to roll, and reducing the chances that you get roll caught by additional orbs or other attacks. Though it's not a new attack, Arrows at distance are a much different animal than arrows from close range. Say, for example, you're too far to get behind Aldrich for arrows. Short of homeward boning, your only option may be to retreat farther. Let's talk about Phase 2. I'll start with two very basic tips. 1. Always have a homeward bone equipped. 2. At the start of the phase, reach Aldrich as quickly as you can. Both of these tips are focused on the absolute worst aspect of Phase 2, arrows. Unlike Phase 1 arrows, you can't defeat Phase 2 arrows by simply getting behind Aldrich. Phase 2 arrows last insanely long, and on top of that, Aldrich can perform other attacks while they're in play. If you reach Aldrich quickly enough and get in range at the start of the phase, he's very unlikely to use arrows. If Aldrich uses arrows at any point, simply bone out. Make sure to create some distance while queuing your bone. One unique attack Aldrich has in Phase 2 is his Life Hunt Scythe. He'll conjure the ethereal scythe, and then perform a double spinning slash with it. The easiest way to deal with this attack is to outspace the first spin by briefly sprinting back, and then roll into the second spin. You can sneak in one punish following the roll, but be careful to get in and out quickly to prevent a teleport. In the event that he goes for this attack, and your back is either to a wall or you're blocked by fire, you may be forced to roll it from point blank. The best way to do this is to roll up and to the left past his right side, right at the moment of the first spin. This is perhaps one of the tightest rolls in the game, making Karthus Blood Ring particularly helpful here. Regarding the rest of Phase 2, what's good to punish in Phase 1 is generally good to punish here as well. There are a couple notable exceptions, of course. Be careful when rolling into Aldrich during the corkscrew attack in Phase 2. Sometimes this attack will body block you, pushing you into the fire. I find that starting with a bit of space and rolling toward the front of his body helps avoid this. Choosing not to punish this attack in Phase 2 is a reasonable choice as well. If you choose this route, make sure you run the length of the fire trail and get back inside the perimeter. This will keep you in melee range. Otherwise, he could back up behind this wall of fire and begin using ranged attacks. You'll want to make the same maneuver if you roll away from and decide not to punish the double slash in Phase 2. If you can't get around these fire trails, stay as close as you can until his next attack. I like to use the orange glow as a visual indicator. Right up to the edge is where you'll want to be. Likewise, you'll want to take a more specific approach to the charging swipe in Phase 2. Make sure you roll slightly inward, toward his body, since the fire trail forms along the edge of the weapon. I'd like to point out that with a couple of these good Phase 1 attacks gaining complications in Phase 2, the single overhead slam becomes one of the better attacks to punish in this phase. Just make sure you pick a side to dodge, and don't try to roll directly into this attack. Same goes for the lunging stab in Phase 2. When fighting Phase 2 Aldrich, it will become immediately apparent that his starting corner positions are not convenient. Because of this, you'll want to guide him into the middle of the arena with each attack. Whether you approach from the length or width of the arena isn't critical. Just note that the initial fire will form to his left. I prefer to approach from the length when he spawns to my left, and the width when he spawns to my right, to account for this. This is more important for low damage runs with a long Phase 2. Otherwise, you should be able to finish him in the first attack or two. Only rush him if you're feeling particularly confident he'll die in a single hit, and you won't miss. Just like the fire trails on Phase 2 melee attacks, teleportations in Phase 2 present complications of their own. First and foremost, every teleportation will come with a cluster of these small magic orbs. The difficulty in dealing with these can vary depending on the position from which he teleports. However, they're typically easier to deal with than those he casts himself from range. A good rule of thumb is to set up for his reappearance on the opposite side, right or left, from which he teleported away. These orbs will begin to fire off as he reappears. This will cause the orbs to fire off at you in one diagonal direction, while you travel in another. If he teleported closer to the middle of the arena, in terms of width, you may need to run along the length, and then cut directly to the side. This can complicate you reaching him fast enough to prevent arrows, if you're not quick. Aldrich is highly resistant to both frost and bleed effects, at least at the tail. The head and torso are somewhat susceptible to these effects, but the added constraint makes fire or lightning buffs arguably the better choice, even for low damage runs. Various twin blade builds are shown in this video, ranging all the way from +6 with Lloyd's Ring to +9 with Flynn's Ring and RTSR. When choosing the routing and build that is right for you, consider a few points. Most prominent is the importance of skipping Phase 2. If avoiding Phase 2 is paramount, all other factors can essentially be disregarded. +9, RTSR, and Flynn's Ring will be the way to go. The second is time and routing efficiency. The first item to go when time is considered will likely be Flynn's Ring, followed by RTSR in favor of Lloyd's, and finally fewer weapon upgrades for the fight. The number of sacrifices made will depend on how important time is to the runner. The final factor is player experience and how well you can capitalize on punishes. As you improve as a player, you will be able to punish better with fewer resources. This factor gains traction when the other two are both considered nice ideals, but not totally imperative. As a player, I find myself more or less in this middle part of the spectrum. I tend to use a +8 or +9 weapon and Lloyd's Ring in my own twin blade runs. And when it comes to SL1, avoiding Phase 2 is possible, but not something that should ever be relied upon. Both lunging attacks, the swipe and the stab, are possible to one cycle, but take multiple headshots to achieve. You might find that two-handing these particular punishes help aims the headshots. I hope you found the video helpful. Feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or via Discord. Good luck with your runs.